Professor Ed Hess, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to a wonderful conversation.
Such a big fan of your books. You've written 13 books. I love Humility is the New Smart, Learn or Die, and we'll spend most of our time in this conversation on your latest, which is Hyperlearning, How to Adapt to the Speed of Change. Before we get to that, Ed, would love to know whereabouts you grew up and how your upbringing impacted the kind of person you've become.
Wow, that's a story until itself. My upbringing was um, pretty unique. You have to understand that I was an outlier. All right, my father was a immigrant from Germany. He got out in 1939. My mother was from New England, and I was raised in a small rural town, 60 miles west of Atlanta in Georgia, and so we were different. I was different, and my upbringing, basically the groundwork of my upbringing was my family was individual. They were entrepreneurs, but we weren't wealthy at all. We were very. It was a very humble background, so to speak. And but the one thing my mother did was that she saved money, and every 2 weeks she took my brother and I to a bookstore, and she basically gave us money to buy books. And so I bought the Hardy Boys, and I bought the whole series about people that were excellent, the Mayo brothers, and certain politicians. And so I grew up in that little tiny town, and reading was my passion, and just dreaming about what the world was like out there. And the second big way that my background was influenced, sports were so important in that small town. In fact, the football coach was one of the star football coaches in the state of Georgia, and he basically was God with a little G in that town. And in the third grade, I went out for Pop Warner football, and like all the other guys, so I had to be part of it. I was a chubby little guy. I couldn't wear Levi pants, which was the in thing. I had to wear Wrangler pants, and so I was humiliated because I was the only guy wearing Wrangler pants. I went out on the football team, and I was the only person not chosen to play in the Pee Wee football team. And that also made me feel, and I had to figure out a way to succeed. And that way to succeed was through the reading, but that way to succeed was I outworked everybody. And whatever was going on, whether it was a test, whether it was, the Monday morning uh, Bible tests where everyone stands up and the teacher reads something from the Bible and asks where it was. I mean, I basically learned the Bible. Um, I basically won because of my rigor and intellectual ability. My life was transformed in the start of the eighth grade. Eighth grade was high school, and the football coach called me. I never met him, and he said, "I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Oh my goodness, I wonder what I did wrong." So he said, "I'm going to come by and see you. Ask your parents if that's okay." And we met, and he says, "I'd like for you to come to my house every morning and ride to school with me. Would you like to become an athletic trainer?" I says, "What's an athletic trainer?" "Well, you will tape ankles, and you will work with the team, and you'll be like a junior coach to me. You're knowing what I'm doing, and you'll be talking with the players and helping me." I said, "That's great." He says, "Well, you come to my house every morning and you ride to school with me." So from the eighth grade till I graduated, at 7:30, I was at coach's house, or even a little earlier, and we drove to school. And in rural Georgia at that time, riding shotgun with the best football coach in rural Georgia to school all of a sudden changed my life. People that wouldn't talk to me talked to me. People in the community that basically, I'd walk in and they say, "You sit there in the back, I'll maybe get to you whenever I get to you." Would basically, when I would walk in, say, "Here, you sit right here by me and you're the next in line." I mean, it changed. So that individual changed my family's life and my life. And to this day, I'm highly indebted to him. And so I came up in this environment where going into the unknown and exploring things and being different and figuring out how I could basically succeed was basically foundational and impacted really everything that's gone on, impacted. And not that, I wasn't that, I wasn't a genius or anything, but that would occurred all through my life. I mean, I went to law school at the last minute, not because I wanted to be a lawyer. It's because I met Robert Kennedy and was felt that he had something, and I wanted to go into politics. And then I went to Wall Street and the business side as an executive. I never had took a finance course. Okay. I mean, I told the chairman when he made the offer, he says, I don't know how to do an IRR. He says, I know that because you worked for me in my law firm, but I know you will know how to do it by Saturday. And so, and I was the person that he would send around the world to do the jobs nobody wanted to do. Go to Puerto Rico and learn how to make false teeth. Go to Puerto Rico and learn how women make, braziers, because all that was relevant to litigation we were doing. So I'll go out in the mountains of Puerto Rico and work with the women, and I'll learn to make braziers. I'll learn to make false teeth. None of it concerned me, and that's been the. And I went to academia without being an academic. So I went to investment banking without being a finance person. I went to academia. So I've had this life that's been very blessed. But the key is not me. The key is I've always had people who basically helped me. And that's why otherness is such a big, important part of my life, my work, and anyone's success if they're really humble and they understand. And this ability to engage with other people in ways that they want to help you without being not sucking up to people, but basically being trying to be a good human being.
What a
Long-winded
beautiful
answer.
No,
Long-winded answer.
what a beautiful beautiful way of putting in context much of what your work has been all about, Ed. Ongoing learning that is part of what you continue to do and advocate for in your own work. The otherness that you mentioned, there have been people that have reached out and supported your growth and development.
Yes.
And you try to do that for others, and it's something that you advocate for. So, what you mentioned comes across also in your work. One other aspect that I found interesting is that you spent a lot of time here in Washington and had a week that none of us would want to have that impacted the trajectory of your life.
Yes. 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 We were living in Washington. In fact, we were living close to Georgetown University, where you went to school. And I was in investment banking and etc. And yeah, I was doing doing real well and everything. And I loved my work. I was full of my work. And my wife's a very wonderful person. Very also very, she's smarter than I am, and she has a law degree.
Well, she went to Georgetown, Ed. You have to give her
Yeah,
that.
yeah. She has a law degree. She has a PhD in public health policy from Hopkins, and she's a microbiologist, immunologist. She's very smart. And I came down to breakfast one morning, and and she said, "We need to talk." And I said, "Okay, what's up?" She says, "You're not the person I married. You're never here. Even when you're physically here, you're not here emotionally. You are your work. You are consumed by your work. This is not working for me. And we need to have a conversation and work through this." And this is probably so embarrassing to say, but I was so out of touch. My answer was, "I hear you. That's very important. But I got a meeting I need to go to. Can we talk about it tonight?" And I left. And then I came home, and there was a note on the table telling me that she was moving out for some months, and that I needed to get help. And so I did. I did get help from found out who was a great coach and wonderful woman. And but that was number one. All right, the thing that hit me. Number number two, my brother and I had in basically created a business in Jacksonville, Florida, where he was a cardiologist. That if you look, it was basically 20 years ahead of its time, but it was basically what CarMax is today is what we built. We built a very nice uh, uh, car dealership that sold used cars, and it was the same model. Okay, and that same week, I got a call from my brother, and he said, "Bro, we got a problem." I says, "What's the problem?" He says, "The bank called, and they need $1 million from us." I says, "What in the world's going on?" They says, "Well, there's been an embezzlement in the business, and we need to put up $500,000 each." Okay, well, that was a real a downer. And then the same week, I was in the final two to be CEO of a leading company in Washington, D.C. And the executive recruiter called me up and he said, this is all the same week, called me up and says, let's have lunch. So we go to lunch and I'm psyched. I know he's not taking me to lunch to tell me no. All right. And this was going to be a great and this was, the CEO of probably the premier real estate developer in the whole Washington area. And he sat me down and he said, "You're the most successful person we've interviewed. You will be wonderful in this job. You know this area. You know the community. You know the international people that we would be financing with. But I'm not recommending you for the job." And I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "There's a disconnect here." He says, "No." He says, "I don't think you'll ever be happy. I think you would keep this job 2 or 3 years, do well, get bored, and leave my client. And I'd rather have my client hire the second best person who doesn't have your ambition and who want to even seek more." So in 1 week, my wife separates. I have my first financial loss, and then my path to corporate CEOdom gets pat, and I went home. It's the first time in my life I actually dropped to my knees in the family room and cried. And at the end of it, I says, "Okay, there clearly is a message here. There's some consistency in all of this. You need to get help, and you need to basically start working on yourself." And with the help of my counselor coach, uh, and you know, this is 30 years later. I'm still working on myself. And I hope I will always be working on myself, because none of us will achieve the level of excellence that's our potential. We're all on journeys. But yeah, that was a heck of a week. That was a heck of a week.
And Ed, that shows the authenticity that you have and the humility that you also talk about. One of the reasons I thought it was important to talk about that part of your experience, even though it's not necessarily focused on hyper learning, is that you are not just recommending these things to other people without your own personal experiences, without consistently working on yourself and learning. This is not recommendation for others. It's what you're doing yourself, which I believe is really important. Leadership is example. Leadership, as you say, is behavior. So you also show that in your example and your behavior. Now, I really appreciate you sharing that. Your book is on hyper learning, how to adapt at the speed of change, and we are going through a lot of change. What is hyper learning at?
Well, hyper learning is the ability to, I mean, really learn at the pace of change. And people say, "Well, I'm a good learner. I got good grades." but they really have never focused on the science of adult learning. And the science of adult learning is crystal clear. We're all suboptimal learners. And successful people have a hard time even hearing those words that we are suboptimal learners, but the science is overwhelming. I mean, we're wired to be speedy, efficient thinkers. We go out in the world, and the world has so much stimuli. We basically only process less than 0.1% of what comes into our body. And so, how does our body know what to process? Well, our body basically, in our mind, everything, we basically we seek confirmation of what we believe. We go out in the world and seek confirmation of what we believe, and we seek affirmation of our ego, and we're emotionally defensive if our views are challenged. And the other point is, we got these stories of how our world works, and we basically seek cohesiveness of our stories. We don't like to say, my story's wrong. We don't like to basically, so we are basically machines, confirmation seeking, ego affirming, cohesive seeking machines. That
No,
is That's us. And the science shows it. In the last 20 years, the neuroscience is proven it. And so, in a world where technology is going to continually advance, it's going to change how we work and who works. And human beings are going to have meaningful work if they can do the things that technology can't do well. And that's basically thinking in ways that technology can't think, being able to emotionally engage with others in ways that are positive, not competitive, but basically from a leadership perspective, in ways that enable people to grow. Uh, and so we got to think differently, and emotions are going to be our key uniqueness. Well, think about it. You went to business school and everything. I mean, how much time did you spend on emotions in business school? I mean, how much time in the workplace historically have we spent on how do we basically connect and relate to other people in positive ways that build the types of relationships that we can basically more, let's just say, optimize collective intelligence or be in a state of flow. All right, just like teams. Um, so the thing about it is that we're suboptimal learners, and I mean,
now I can see it. A lot of people that listen to the podcast and a lot of leaders nodding in agreement that we are confirmation seeking machines. We are not naturally good learners. Ego, fear play a role in it. However, that doesn't apply to me because I have been able to make the right decisions to move up in my organization, to get into the right schools, to get to the position I'm in. So there is a level of agreement on the statements that you make about the general population or about most of the people that I'm surrounded with. However, I have been able to achieve this level of success because I am not confirmation seeking machine. I don't let ego and fear get in the way.
well, the environment which the person got to his success is going to be completely transformed and is being transformed in the digital age. So part of the necessity for being open to this change is the, the speed at which change is going to occur, and the skills that are going to be needed to transform organizations. Organizations are going to have to, in most organizations, create different cultures, really get in the human development business. All right, not the because people don't really have never been trained how to think, how to go into the unknown and explore. How do you train somebody to go into the unknown and explore? Because technology is going to do all of the stuff that's, let's just say, easy to do. And so it's the environment's going to change. The environment that you're going into requires a different skill set than the environment that you're in now. So, so I've had CEOs tell me, look, I've only got 3 to 4 years left. This is not going to happen until 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I'm just going to play the game I got. All right. I've had CEOs tell me that. And my answer is that the legacy you want to leave behind? Do you have any duty to the organization or to the thousands of employees to help get them on the journey so that once you leave successful and when it hits the fan, all these people are going to basically be out? And and I have those types of conversations with people. So it's it really comes down to CEOs have got to basically buy into the story and have got to have a purpose why they believe their organization has got to change. And that's part of the story. What's very interesting, the two biggest inhibitors of learning are ego and fear. Most of the CEOs that I've worked with who have made the change, we've had conversations like you just had, okay? And I don't, and this is the way I approach it. I says, what do you want your legacy to be here? And we have a conversation, and most CEOs buy into what we're talking about because of ego or fear. Ego, wanting to go out a winner, I want to stay the best. Fear of my legacy, being negative, people, changing their views of me. Now, learning, the two biggest inhibitors are ego and fear. But what's so funny is people make the judgment and they'll say to me, no, I want to leave behind something. I want to leave the best company behind. I want to be able, when I leave, to look 5 years out. Well, I says, well, if you're going to do that, you got to build the foundation now. Because it's not possible 5 years from now. I says, even if you don't, think you need all this stuff, and I'm willing at that point in the conversation to say, even if you think you don't need all this stuff, your people do, because they're going to be here. And then we get to the conversation as to, okay, in order for this to work, you got to role model the behaviors that you want your people to role model. All right. And that's a different conversation. But it's a new story. It's what I call the difference between old smart and new smart, which is basically a different approach to work. And and I tell them, old smart's the new dumb. Technology's made the old smart the new dumb. Um, and so, but you're exactly right. This is not an easy sell. This is not something that people, because also, think about it. Every CEO I've ever worked with, after working with them a while, and even big companies, organizations, after a while, they, sometimes when you're having a cup of coffee or you're talking, they says, well, to be really honest, I was really scared whether I could do this. And I didn't want to look bad. I understand that. Yeah, this is hard work, but it's not rocket science. It's and the other thing that CEOs buy into is my work, your work is based a lot on behavior change and deliberate practice and the science of deliberate practice. And I always use examples of great athletes or great warriors. All right. And the methodology that in my book, in my work, the deliberate practice is used by the Navy SEALs and the Special Forces. It's used by great athletes, great musicians, great creative artists. All right, and so there's a science behind it. And so I talked to him. I says, well, you know, who's your favorite athlete? What do you think he or she does to keep that edge? And I tell them stories about athletes that I know of, an NBA athlete who is a great shooter. takes 1,000 shots every day, 7 days a week. And he's one of the best in the world. All right. But 1,000 shots. I said, why is this guy doing this? Don't you think he can hit the basket? He's doing it to get that little more edge. Little
And
more
that's what
edge.
and that's why it's important that, and I wanted to make that point, that regardless of the level of success we've achieved in life, whatever school we've gotten into, whatever grades we got, whatever positional power we have in the organization, all of us, all of us need to become hyper learners. And it requires letting go of that ego that my past successes differentiate me. Therefore, I know what I'm doing. Letting go of that ego and letting go of that fear, which requires what you mentioned, that new smart.
Yeah.
What is new smart? You go through 5 principles of what it takes to be smart in this new age.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a little background. The concept of New Smart, I created the concept of New Smart um, back when my humility book was in the market. And I was having just a hard time having conversations about humility with CEOs. And so I said, I got to have a different story. And so, what is New Smart? I'm defined not by what I know or how much I know, but by the quality of my thinking, listening, relating, and collaborating. So it's not how much I know, okay, but it's the quality of how I think, how I listen, how I relate to people, how I collaborate. My mental models, now this is from science, my mental models are not reality, they're only my generalized stories of how my world works. You have different mental models than I have, all right? We both have different mental models than Jane or Jim has. All right, and so they're not reality. They're these stories we created because by being confirmation biased. Okay, people. I'm not my ideas. I must decouple my beliefs, my ideas from my ego. In other words, don't define yourself by what you think you know. All right, be open to going out and affirmative looking for disconfirming information. I must be open minded and treat my beliefs, not my values, as hypotheses to be constantly tested, subject to modification by better data. Okay? And this is one of the principles that Ray Dalio at Bridgewater has. I mean, there's one thing in his organization is everything is to be stress test. Everything's to be stress test because data is changing. There's new information coming out. That's the way we stay up with it. And my mistakes and failures are opportunities to learn. So long as you're learning, you don't really have mistakes or failures. You have mistakes and failures when you basically rationalize the mistake or failure and say, well, someone else made a mistake, or the data's not right, or we're missing something instead of doing data. So it's a new approach which basically enables people enables people to really sort of detach their essence from I know this. I'm smarter than everybody. It allows you to constantly get smarter and smarter because you are basically improving your knowledge, improving what the, your ability to go in the world and discover, etc. You're learning how to have better conversations with people that enable them to speak up and bring their uniqueness to the table. You're learning how to basically uh, behave in ways that enable your organization to have a real mindset, but a real philosophy of oneness. Okay, we're all in this together. All right, and everyone needs to be successful, and we're all here to help each other instead of this survival of the fittest competitive mentality that comes out of the Industrial Revolution age. The digital age will basically require survival of the fittest and competitive mindset in organizations to basically go away. All right. And if they don't go away, those organizations will be suboptimized.
Each
Because really
one
and truly, really and truly going forward, organizations are going to have to embrace the fact that our human uniqueness going forward with technology getting smarter and smarter is the emotional component. And that's something that COVID brought to the table. Companies basically were confronted with the emotional needs of their employees and stresses. And so many companies, because of COVID, started having, you know, uh, voluntary or meetings early in the morning or meetings just about how are you doing? How are things at home? How can we help you? All right, in the situation. There was more helping conversations probably since COVID in the last 2 years. I have no data on this. Probably more conversations in the last 2 years than probably happened in the last 20 years added together.
it, Ed, each one of the principles is a gem that we could literally spend hours talking about. And that's why it's important to read the book and do some self reflection around it, even to the point of on a daily or weekly basis, whether for yourself or for the team, to reflect on these things before having conversations, before going deeper, because thinking through each one of these principles also adds a level of humility with which we approach those conversations, where I understand that my mental models are different than yours. Therefore, there is a different level of engagement that I need to have with you on that front. Or I must be open minded with respect to every idea being a hypothesis. So each one of these, in my view, are worthy of in depth conversations with the team in order for the team to become a high functioning team.
Yes, I agree with you. You're spot on. And organizations that have put this model into play have learned that. I'll give you an example. There's one organization, global organization, in every conference room in every building that they're in, rented or owned in the world, has a rules of engagement, which the organization came together from the top down and created. How do we want to behave in collaborative conversations? And there's a checklist. And everybody goes in and they start each meeting with a check-in. All right. How's everybody? Where's your head? Where's your heart? Is everybody in good position to have this conversation? You feel all right? Anything we need to talk about? Everybody know why we're here? Okay. So let's have our what I call high quality making meaning conversation. We'll go through the conversation, and then the end of the conversation, everybody looks at that checklist and everybody grades the group on the checklist. And then they have a short conversation. And then they have a checkout. I have a lot of teams which have basically adopted the philosophy of each meeting having a time, 2, 3 minute meditation time or silence time or centering time, taking deep breaths, calming down, being fully here, getting in the right mindset. Um, all of these little tools or little, yeah, I call them tools, are basically help people slow down. All right. Um, the two fundamental concepts of success in the digital age from an individual viewpoint is inner peace and otherness. That we can come to the table in a state of inner stillness, uh, quiet ego, quiet mind, calm body, okay, and a positive emotional state. and be open to the conversation, non-judgmental, fearless, open-minded, etc. All right. I mean, and those are the. I mean, I'm convinced that the differentiation in success going forward, especially in big organizations, is the quality of conversations that occur in the organization. Because effective collaboration is going to be mission critical in the digital age, because the speed of adaptation that's needed, it's not going to be, certain individuals solving everything. And so this inner peace, do I come in ready to have a good making meaning conversation? And then the second concept that's so key is the concept of otherness. And Barbara Fredrickson, noted uh, professor at the University of North Carolina, who does wonderful work. A quote of hers I use all the time: "It is scientifically correct to say that nobody reaches his or her full potential in isolation." And this ability to basically come together and have conversations that are not advocacy, not self-promotion, not competition, but seeking mutual understandings. You mentioned it before, okay? Mutual understanding. I need to understand your story. You need to understand my story. Maybe the real story out there that we need to do is somewhere in between, or maybe there's a new story that neither one of us are got. How do we figure out that new story? That's the type of work. And having seen companies that do this will sound weird. It's magical. It's magical. People will tell me that what used to take a day can be done in 2.5 hours of meetings, because we've gotten to the point where we trust each other. We care about each other. It's not competitive. We got our egos tamped down. Okay? It's for the greater good, okay, of the organization, people, society, etc. Uh, it's magical when this happens. It's magical.
Because as you say, Ed, the highest level of collaboration happens in caring, trusting teams. And to underline the points that you made, it first requires the individual to be able to have some inner peace. You provide frameworks and practices for each one of us as individuals to do that. And then a certain level of that otherness, which requires a different mindset than the way a lot of us approach relationships with. So the inner peace and the otherness can help create the trusting team that has that competitive advantage of speedy, trusting collaboration.
Yes. And the key in the business world going forward is what's called high collective intelligence, the intelligence of the group, not the intelligence of the individual. All right. We all have been successful because we've been good at knowing. The digital age, the people successful are the people who excel in not knowing and learning how to get what's going on.
And in that
So
process,
everything's upside down.
as you mentioned, it's the ability to tap into that collective intelligence. And you shared the example with the manufacturing team, talking about love in the business. That is one of those terms that a couple of businesses have been known in using, but needs to happen more. You knew and worked with Bill Turner and Herb Kelleher, who famously were really into having love in the business as a part of business practices. What role will that love play in tapping into the collective intelligence of the high functioning teams and organizations of the future?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, in order to have those high functioning teams in the future and get collective intelligence, the people in the on the team, you've got to have those caring, trusting relationships. So if you think about it, deep caring, the difference between deep caring and platonic love is pretty small. I care about you as an individual. I want you to be successful. I, I feel your pains. You know, and we have this. It's it's a strong friendship. All right, it's which of trust and caring. Well, that's really, if you think about it, platonic love. All right, I mean uh, and it was interesting. You mentioned Herb Kelleher, who was a wonderful human being, very unique person, and I was with him in his office in Dallas one day, working on a project, and he said, "Well, it's time. Your car will take you back to the plane." And of course, I was flying Southwest Air, and he said, "I'll walk you down." And I says, "No, Herb, you don't need to do that." He says, "No, you need to go through a couple of floors with me." So we started going through a couple of floors, and people started getting out of their desk in their cubicles and coming up and saying, "Hello, Herb." And every one of those people, he knew their names, and he asked about their children. And it was just like, wow. And I mean, that said something. I had another senior executive at American Eagle Outfitters years ago when I was doing work with them, their headquarters outside Pittsburgh. And I was spending a day with him, and he's at 11 a.m. He says, "We need to take an hour break." I says, "But we got our agenda." He says, "What I'm doing in this hour is very important, more important than what you're doing with me. So you can go with me." So what he did is, behind American Eagle Outfitters was a big industrial warehouse where all of the clothing that comes in from Asia for the East Coast is there. And it was basically people unpacking and fixing orders. And it was hundreds and hundreds of workers, women and men workers. And he said, "Okay, we're going to go down three lines." So we go down a line, and he stops at a person, and I don't remember the names. I say, he said, "Mary, how are you doing? How's your son Billy?" He goes down the line, and every person, he knows their first name, and he asks them about how they're doing family wise and everything. And I'm just saying, wow. And I come back, and he looks at me and he says, and he was vice chairman of the company. He says, "The most important thing I do is that hour every day I'm here. And do you understand why?" I says, "Yeah, I think I get it." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "That's where high performance comes from, when people feel cared about."
What a beautiful example of that genuine love that some of the leaders have shown consistently over the years. Now, one of the interesting things in we have the opportunity, Ed, to tell new stories. I love Yuval Harari's *Sapiens*, how a lot of frameworks around us are stories. Therefore, we can change the stories in order to be able to thrive in that future. And Gary Bolus, Singularity University, also says much of the frameworks around us are not natural laws. These are man made decisions and policies. So, this new era is going to require a new kind of thinking, new policies, new stories. However, it all starts back with ourselves, our individual selves, our teams, and as you said, the leaders of organizations which have the opportunity to embrace that hyper learning and a different story within their organizations. So, for people interested to find out more about your work, Ed, your writing, where can they connect with you and read more of your work?
There's a there's a lot of stuff on my website, www.edhess.org. The hyperlearning book, and posts and articles and etc. That's the easiest way. And then people then will have they'll have my email and everything. People can reach out if they have questions or whatever. but there's a lot of information there to start. And I mean, there's visuals, the journey to hyperlearning, a one-page visual. There's visuals on having high quality, making meaning conversations, what collaboration models should be, etc. Uh, in, in the website, there's little blogs on specific points that I've done. And as I said, lots of articles and lots of podcasts. Okay, I mean, your podcast will go on when I receive it. Lots of podcasts that people can choose their favorite podcaster and listen to. And so the information is there. The 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 thing that is so important for people to realize, and you realize it because you've made the point several times, everything that we're talking about is doable by any individual. None of this is rocket science. You don't need a PhD in psychology or engineering or artificial intelligence. Everything we're talking about, okay, is doable. It is by an individual. Individuals were the great philosophers were doing this thousands of years ago when there was no technology. Okay, all right, and so and so people don't need to feel overwhelmed because the book puts forth a model of step by step. Start with these things, okay, and understand you're going to be on a journey. You're not all of a sudden going to go from, you know, okay to outstanding. No, this is a lifelong journey. I mean, every morning I do my daily practices. Okay, I've been doing this for years. Am I still improving? Yes. Well, do I need to keep doing it for the next 10 years? God willing, yes. Okay. uh, you work on different things, and that's the sort of the inner joy of saying, I'm trying to be better. But the world will tell you you're being better because the world will react to the new you, your friends, your family, your cohorts at work. All right. And there'll be more meaning. Okay. This whole thing about well being and happiness, it all comes down to the same thing that underlies hyper learning: inner peace and otherness.
And what a great way to throw down a challenge to the audience that's listening to this, Ed. I really appreciate your work. We just touched on the surface of it. So there is a lot more to be read, both in hyperlearning and your other books. Most importantly, though, there is a lot to be done in practicing what you lay out so we become hyper learners and continue to grow and get better, which is why I really appreciate all the great work that you've done in allowing me to continue on my journey of learning and sharing this with the partnering leadership community. Thank you so much, Ed Hess.
Well, thank you. You're most kind. I enjoyed being with you. Wish you all the best, and I hope our paths cross again.